The major programming of the sorority is based on the 5-point programmatic thrust, and this evening's program of Civics 101, Women in Politics, Understanding Their Role in Government, falls directly under our political awareness and involvement thrust. Thank you for choosing to join us this evening, and what better way to continue to showcase and celebrate Women's History, or should I say Her Story Month, but showcase our panel of phenomenal women. I just want to inform our listening and viewing audience some events of the chapter that they have coming up and you will hopefully consider joining. May Week 2021, Appreciating Today, Planning for Tomorrow. This will be offered via virtual, Zoom, and it will take place through the week of Monday, May 10th, Wednesday, May 12th, Thursday, May 13th, and rounding out the week on Sunday, May 16th. Please continue to follow us on our social media platforms of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, as well as logging on to our official website of www.dstsialumni.org. On our website, you will have that opportunity to subscribe to our chapter's monthly newsletter and stay up to date with the chapter's events and activities. Before I go, I just want to express my gratitude to our panel of guests this evening, from our moderator and president of the Brooklyn chapter of the NAACP, L. Joy Williams, Congressmember Yvette D. Clarke, State Senator Diane J. Savino, Assembly Member Latrice Walker, and rounding out, but certainly not least, Councilmember Deborah Rose. Thank you to our SIAC's own Social Action Chair, Michelle Achungpung, and her committee, along with the technology gurus of this evening, Brittany and Kalita, and our Chair of Technology, who couldn't be with us this evening, LaDana Renee Jenkins. Thank you for being with us. Enjoy the program, and I now turn it over to my soror, Michelle Achungpung. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Scott. Good evening, all, and thank you for taking time out to join us as we celebrate Women's History Month with some phenomenal women legislators from the federal, state, and municipal government. We remember those shoulders we stand on. Women's Suffrage March of 1913, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated was just born, and we marched for equality and voting rights. Harriet Tubman, fighting for freedom. She died 7 days after this march. Shirley Chisholm, first Black woman elected to the US Congress and first Black woman to run for United States president to represent the people, unbought and unbossed. Now we have Madam Vice President Kamala Harris, the first female Vice President of the United States, the highest ranking female officer in United States history. Now I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening, L. Joy Williams, a dynamic political strategist, public speaker, political analyst, social justice activist, a featured commentator on MSNBC and New York One. L. Joy is Chairwoman Emeritus of Higher Heights for America and now serves as chair of the Higher Heights PAC. I just want to say I'm a proud member, founding member of this great organization. She believes in empowering communities with the knowledge and skills to be active participants in democracy. She walks in the steps of those who fought before her and encourages every citizen to become involved in America's political process. Let's welcome L. Joy Williams. Yay.
Thank you, Michelle. I need to take you on the road with me so you can introduce me wherever I go. I ain't never heard that introduction before. Thank you so very much. And I know we have some wonderful, wonderful women for this conversation this evening, some of which I feel like they just need to rotate the Zooms because we're on some of the same Zooms during the week. But I am pleased that we are joined by women who represent all levels of government for us to have a conversation about women's political leadership, which I think is so important at this time When at the top, while we celebrate that we have Vice President Kamala Harris, there are also left no women in the Senate, no Black women in the Senate. And then across the country, while we are increasing numbers steadfastly, there are still a number of legislatures, in addition to state leadership and executive leadership, there are ceilings we are still yet to crack. But the women that we have to discuss this evening are certainly making waves in their own way. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to do seniority here, and begin with our congressional member, the Honorable Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke from Brooklyn. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And as I introduce each of our panelists, I just want you to respond quickly to this quick question about how you feel your leadership as a woman sort of impacts the policy in place in the chamber, in the House that you're in. So I'm going to introduce our Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and then I'll go down to Senator Savino.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, Joy L. Williams, to our soror president of the Staten Island Alumni Chapter, Yolanda Scott, to my dear soror sister, Soror Michelle, to my dear colleagues here present, Senator Savino, Assemblywoman Walker, and Council Member Rose. It's my honor to be with each and every one of you this evening. It's a power evening, and I feel empowered just by being in your presence and being a panelist this evening. I represent the 9th District of New York, Central and South Brooklyn, and I've served in the United States House of Representatives for 14 years, just started my 15th year. And what I share with people about going to the United States House of Representatives, representing the people of the 9th District of New York, I find that my presence there changes the chemistry of the body. And it changes the chemistry of the body by virtue of my lived experiences. Those lived experiences are unique. They're unique to everyone except me, because I've walked the walk. I've lived the experience of my constituents, and I represent their interests in Washington, D.C. And being a Black female, left-handed, of Caribbean descent, I find myself oftentimes in the minority. And that means that my voice is even more essential in crafting policy and legislation, because it's often the marginalized, it's often the most vulnerable, it's often women of color whose interests are not addressed, and not addressed in a way in which it is informed by the experiences that we have lived in the states, in the nation, in the municipalities in which we work, live, and raise our families. And so being a member coming from Brooklyn, New York, I bring that to policymaking. I bring that lens and widen the aperture to the experiences of the people who live in the 9th District of New York through the eyes of a Black woman who was born and raised, grown up in this community and in these communities, and have represented a very diverse constituency, have had the opportunity to be shaped by that constituency, and then can bring an authentic voice to their desires as we shape the policies of our nation, that their particular interests, our particular interests, are not left off the table when conversations, debates, when policy is being crafted that will impact the lives of the American people.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next, we have Senator Diane Savino, who represents the 23rd District, which is parts of Brooklyn and also parts of Staten Island. Well, yeah, parts of Staten Island. Senator Savino, same question. How do you feel you impact the chamber in which you are elected to serve?
First, let me just say thank you to everyone for inviting me here tonight. You know, it's like the Congresswoman. I've been involved so many years. It's hard for me to think about where I started. I've known so many of the participants tonight in various ways. When I think about where I started almost 30 years ago in government as a caseworker in the child welfare system, working my way through the labor movement, meeting many of the people. I think about, like, I met Debbie Rose when she was running for office the first time, when I was a political director for my union, the union that now Michelle Achampong has the position that I held when I left to run for Senate, and I was a political director. The vice president of that union when Yvette Clarke was a city council person, and then I helped her run for Congress. And like, these are the places that I went. Then I eventually went into the Senate myself. And I think of the Senate that I ran for in 2004, a Senate that was overwhelmingly run by men, where the idea of women running, I was the first woman to be elected from the New York State Senate from Staten Island. And you think about that, that's kind of strange. But we're still breaking barriers even in the New York State Senate. And now, for the first time in history, we have not just a woman who's running the New York State Senate, but the first African-American woman ever to lead a legislative chamber in the country. And that's Andrea Stewart-Cousins. And so what do women bring to the New York State Senate? It's a kind of different approach. And the one thing I've always said about women, when we come into elected office, most of the time, I say we're like accidental activists. We run for office because we're educators, we're social workers, we're encouraged to run for office because of things that occur in our community that compel us to get involved in politics. And then we find our way there, and then we find our voice. And we translate that voice into activism and policy, and we make our communities better. And it's different the way the men get there. Men always seem to have different kinds of networks, and they think that they know when they're in like kindergarten that they want to be president of the United States. And women don't kind of do that. Right, and you're laughing, but we all know it's true. And I always say we need to find ways to encourage women to become those types of, you know, leaders that we see in ourselves, but we don't naturally find in ourselves until we're there in that moment. And then when we're there and we're able to make those types of policies. So we look at where we are now. And for the first time, I'm seeing the New York State Senate being led by a woman, being policies being driven by a larger than ever female-led Senate, and that we have more young women in the Senate. I'm old now by the Senate. And I'm 57 years old. The average age of females in the Senate now are 34. Wow. That's shocking. They're driving policy now. They're talking about the things that we've always known are necessary. Childcare issues. How do we make policies in the workforce fairer for young women? How do we drive dollars to places that make things fairer for people so that we can have a more equitable workforce? How do we do things that make, you know, education policies better for everybody? And that's really important. And so now you have women of my age who've kind of fought this fight slowly, and we have younger women driving it. And I think that's the, you know, the connection between those of us who've been there longer and been, you know, trying to fight the fight, and now we have younger women who have a little bit more energy, who are willing to, you know, just fight it out. And I'm really excited about where we are right now. We have women with more experience and younger women with more drive, and I think we're finally at a tipping point where we're going to be able to really drive the conversation in a way that delivers concrete public policy that helps not just women, but everybody. And families in a profound way. So I'm kind of excited about where we are in government for the first time in a long time. And I think it's a great place for all of us to be.
Thank you so very much. Next up is the wonderful, who loves me so very much, as she said earlier. The Assemblywoman representing Brownsville, the heart of Brownsville, Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, and same question to you as well.
Okay, so I was a little bit on the move, so can you repeat the question?
So the question is, we're asking each of you, how do you believe your presence as a woman, as a Black woman, changes the nature or changes or makes an impact on the chamber or in the body you represent?
Oh, okay. That's an easy one and a great one. So let's say when I first started, one of my male colleagues came over to our chamber in the New York State Assembly, and he said, all of these women are in the legislature now, and they're all so new, they don't know what they can't ask for. Because I had the audacity to stand in conference and on the floor and requesting, $700 million for Central Brooklyn hospitals. And I didn't really get to say I'm Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, and my district is the 55th Assembly District of Fighting 55th. But I came from Congresswoman Yvette Clarke's office, right? And so, there was a woman who pushed me to meet my own boundaries and even exceed them. And while working for her, we were all engaged in the Medicaid waiver and fighting for those resources. And so by the time I got to Albany, I can't say I knew where the bones were buried, but I knew where we were parking some resources from Washington, D.C. And that's the thing, like a lot of resources come out of D.C., but we don't really get the credit. We don't really give them the credit that they deserve in terms of the work that they do when they send us resources. But, so at least I was able to have that expertise and then come into this body. And a part of my natural progression was to go and get those resources where I knew that they had been laid. And so that's one thing. So we were too new, that we don't know what we cannot ask for is the one lesson that people tried to put on us. And then another person got up on the floor and said that the most dangerous place for a Black child is in his mother's womb. And it was like, wait, what? And I'm not going to say who said that from Staten Island, but
I know who it was.
the audacity. Well, anyway, and so one of the other things is like I was a single mom, and there were other single mothers there too, and there were women who were pregnant, and then we just brought all our kids up to Albany and was just like, you know what, here, since we can't handle it, you take them. And so my now 9-year-old is still here. We're in Albany at the moment, and we are doing remote learning. And so we're remote learning as well as, being in the Judiciary Committee, handling one of the most historic meetings, quite frankly, in my lifetime. And, and she's over there saying to me, Assemblywoman Latrice, I'm hungry. Can I get some breakfast? And so it's humbling. It's awesome. And so I think that one of the things that, or even another moment, like, single dads as well. When Speaker Hasty first got his speakership, he would have his daughter come up to Albany. And one day, in the speaker's office were just all these children. And then there were like American Girl dolls and teddy bears and video games from Diana's son. And so it was just beautiful. And then there were Black girl dolls too. And, only the things that our ancestors probably couldn't even imagine, but, that a little Black doll was going to be laying on a speaker's desk in the state legislature. And then I went into Assemblywoman Ways and Means Chair Helene Weinstein's office, and Nile is in there, and she's like, oh, great, Nile can stay in here. And she's handling heavy duty, budgetary conversations as a woman, another Brooklyn woman. And I'm like trying to grab my kid from out of her office. And she's like, oh, no problem. She can stay in here. And she's like on the couch with her teddy bears laid out and her blanket, and she's like sucking her thumb. And it was just like the one thing that I think that I could say that we brought in this class of women was really about the fact that issues regarding childcare have to be dealt with, because clearly we are dealing with them even in what we do. Issues regarding reproductive health care rights, right? Like when Speaker Hasty, when he finally got, the bills across the finish line, one of the reporters asked him, well, why now? And he was like, well, I have all these new women that are there. And so, in honor of women having the right to vote and being in the centennial plus 1 year, and the centennial plus 1 year of an amazing organization, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. I thank you so much to my D9 sisters for having me here. And Michelle was like, make sure you have some para. And I was like, I'm a Neo. We never leave home without it. So God bless you. And I look forward to the rest of the chat.
Thank you so very much, Assemblywoman. Councilmember Debbie Rose, I'll go to you. In addition to all of the women in serving in the city council, representing your community on the very local level, I put the same question to you in dealing with, a body in the city council, but then also being, as you like often remind us, alone, in Staten Island.
Thank you so much. Thank you, El Joy. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really honored that Delta Sigma Theta invited me to be among all of these illustrious women lawmakers who have just served so stellar and have really changed the trajectory of life in our communities. I want to thank President Scott for having me, and I want to say to my fellow my female legislators that you have always provided a strong example for me. What I bring to the city council, to this position, is from Staten Island, is a voice that had not ever been previously heard. Being the first woman of color, the first African-American elected on Staten Island to anything. We never even had a dog catcher of color, so my voice was a voice that was not previously heard at the table. And I serve in a delegation that is unlike, there is no delegation in the entire city council that is like my delegation. First of all, we're the smallest, we're only 3, but the others are, it's 2 white males, Republicans. And so I am the only Democratic voice from Staten Island, that's at the table at city council. And so, as a woman, I see issues from a very different prism than my colleagues, than my delegation. In fact, I see issues where they don't even see issues. And so that means that there's a whole segment of the population in Staten Island that doesn't often have their voices heard at the city level. And so I'm really grateful that in the city council, we have a women's caucus, and the women's caucus has developed and taken women's issues and made it, our banner issues. So that helps drive our legislation. And, the fact that I am the first person of color elected on Staten Island, it also gives me the opportunity to bring the issues of equity to the table, issues that have historically not been addressed, or have been addressed again through a different lens, and with voices that were really important missing. And so I am really excited that I have this opportunity, because I feel that, most government is local. And I get to deal with the day-to-day bread and butter issues that affect my community. And I feel that that's a place where I can have the most impact. And that, again, voices that just were marginalized or not even recognized have now have an advocate in my voice. I literally had to do what Shirley Chisholm said. I had to bring my own damn chair to the table. And I had to decide, you know, what I was going to do and what type of voice I was going to be for Staten Island. So I am excited that I was given that opportunity to do so.
Thank you so very much, Councilwoman. You know, the other question that occurs to me is each of you have talked about different issues that you've brought in your respective chambers and legislature. But we also, as women, get pigeonholed in terms of what women's issues are. And Congresswoman, you know, I'll go to you first, right? You know, we're talking about women's issues. They may talk about, you know, reproductive issues. They'll talk about, you know, childcare. And I remember some years ago doing a national poll through Higher Heights. And then we did one in Georgia, Ohio, New York. And we were polling issues at the time. And the number one issue of concern for women was the economy. And if you think about the economy, it is not discussed as a women's issue. But we all know, you know, as elected leaders and those of us who are advocates and others know that, you know, the matters of the pocketbook are what, you know, women do care about. And in fact, women care about all issues, you know, and so I'd love for each of you to just take a quick minute to sort of talk about any experience you've had to sort of push that narrative that we care about more issues than just what are pigeonholed as women's issues.
Oh God, please. So Eljoy, thank you for that. So I have tried over the past 5 or 6 cycles to try and reframe the issue of childcare as not a woman's issue. First of all, I hate that term because I think it marginalizes us.
Right.
It allows people to go, okay, ladies, go in the corner over there and talk about the women's stuff. Childcare, in my opinion, should be an economic development issue because it allows women to stay in the workforce. When you think about this, the lack of childcare forces women, particularly low-wage women, out of the workforce for extended periods of time. And what does that do? It doesn't just force them out of the workforce, it hurts them in the long run because it takes them out of the workforce for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Even women who work in the government sector. If you're a teacher, if you're a caseworker like myself, I don't have any kids, so I'm not going to be affected by this. But you think about young women who go into the workforce, even in a unionized sector, and they're forced to step away for 2, 3, 4 years. Maybe they have a second child, 5 years. That impacts them not just in their day-to-day workforce, but when they come back, they have now lost 4 or 5 years in earning power. That affects them today. In their earning power, that affects them in their ability to move forward in their immediate time, and it affects their retirement and their income security in their old age. And women are constantly playing catch up on that. We don't recognize that. We keep talking about childcare like it's a touchy-feely subject. We should be incentivizing employers through economic development to create policies that have on-site daycare. We should make that, you know, something that they should have on site, so people will then allow women to come to work, drop off your child. They do it in other countries. Why can't we do that? We don't recognize childcare as a benefit that we should incentivize, so women can stay in the workforce. And when we start talking about that as women and demanding that as a benefit, I think we'd be better placed. And I don't know why we don't do that. It's just, it drives me crazy. And every time I talk to the women's rights groups, they look at me and their eyes roll over. You know why? Because I call them the ladies who lunch. The vast majority of the women's organizations who get involved in, you know, advocating for stuff are women who don't need this. They're overwhelmingly, they're women with money. They can afford daycare. They can afford nannies. They don't need low-cost childcare. They're not affected by these decisions. It's low-wage women who are most affected by the lack of affordable childcare. And we in government, we tinker around the edges. We give a few dollars here and a few dollars there. You look at what we did, especially we raised the minimum wage, which was critically important. But for a lot of women who are working in low wage jobs, we raised their wage and we pushed them off the benefit cliff because they were qualifying for low cost childcare or subsidized childcare. They qualified for maybe subsidized health insurance. But if they make $1 more or $2 more because it's means tested, they lost those benefits. They couldn't afford to earn more money. We need to think about that as women in government and policymakers. What are we really doing? We have to think about it in a holistic way. And we don't really do that because we respond to those who say, well, let's just raise the wage. Well, most women in these low wage jobs can't afford the increase in their paycheck when it costs them those benefits. We're not thinking about it in a more holistic way. I just had to have that.
Anyone
rant
else?
because it drives me crazy.
I'm going to concur with our senator and say that our presence in the body now changes that chemistry.
Thank you, Yvette. Help me.
You know, that certainly is and was a prevailing sort of perception of women's issues. I think now that we have leadership, whether it is Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who's the majority leader, or whether it is Kamala Harris, who is vice president, whether it's Nancy Pelosi, who is Speaker of the House, the numbers of women that have been elected to office now are game changers. And when I think about the American Rescue Plan and how Rosa DeLauro, the head of our Appropriations Committee in the House, alongside many other women who have been in Congress for decades, have been fighting for a child tax credit all these years. And then now we're in the 117th session of Congress with the largest number of women ever elected to Congress in history. And we were able to pass that in the American Rescue Act. It speaks to the strength, the power, the endurance, and the force that is women. Because you're absolutely correct. These are economic issues, and we're not going to allow for people to marginalize us and tell us what women's issues are. That they were called women's issues because we weren't in these bodies in significant numbers, gaining seniority and power in those spaces. We're now in those spaces. And so I will challenge you now, El Joy, to find in the state of New York, or even at the national level, a space where we're not talking about every issue as a women's issue, or every issue as an American or a New York State or a New York City issue, because our voices are shaping policy now and passing laws now in ways in which even 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. So I'm excited about it. I will, like I gave one example, what the child care tax credit that is in the American Rescue Plan is a game changer for families. Because if you're in a family where, women and men are both working in that family, but the child care burden had fallen on the shoulders of both parents. Let's put it that way. Now, with the child care tax credit, we are putting a floor under those families from which they can build, from which there's an acknowledgement of the family unit, and that the woman in certain instances where they are the main, child care provider, will have that lifeline that will not only help economically, but will raise that child out of poverty or impoverished circumstances. Game changer. And why did this become a game changer? Because so many women, like Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, who's a working parent, showed up in the Congress and decided that this was the moment we've been waiting for. if we're going to recover from this economic, healthcare, social justice moment, we've got to center the experiences of our lives in that space and make sure that the economics that drive our ability to thrive and to prosper are at the center of it. And, you know, I think, again, we may have crossed that Rubicon, Senator, and we got to hold on and continue to build from there.
Well, speaking of that, Assemblywoman Walker, you all are in Albany now negotiating with days away on a deal of a budget. And like so many states across the country, because of the COVID crisis, there are a lot of conversations about cuts. There are a lot of conversations about, you know, where do we shift money around, while at the same time taking care of people who were struggling before the pandemic, and how do you provide a safety net, and sort of thinking through that, bringing all of your experience, bringing all of yourself to the table, and how do you negotiate that in the space that we're in?
Well, one of the things that I remember from having a conversation with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and I was like, you know, they talk about the fact that women have such a hard time raising money, and, you know, like, what's your secret sauce? And so she indicated to me that whenever she is on the telephone and advocating and dialing for dollars and doing her thing, that she thinks about, you know, the single mother from her district, and she speaks about all of those individuals and the people who she encounter in along her journey. And so that's pretty much, you know, how whenever I think of the advocacy that I do, that's that sort of deep memory that I go into. And so, sort of tying that into the last question as well, I went to Pace Law School, was an environmental law school, and energy was like my thing. Went to school in Brazil, and then, you know, fought to be on the energy committee and was the chair of the subcommittee on renewable energy. And the person who was sort of in that solar energy space, a guy who I love, he was like, you know, come out of the solar energy space and go be wind girl, right? And it's like, you know, okay, but I'm here. And we were able to think about all of the young people in let's say communities like mine where asthma rates are really, really high. And I see so many Black women with their children on machines in the hospitals, dealing with asthma, dealing with healthcare. And I said, you know, we got to do something about pollution within our communities. And we fought for a $250 million initiative. It was the Brooklyn Queens Demand Management Program. And we did over 225 solar panel installations in our community, just talking about the fact that, look, when the elevators are broken in NYCHA, which I grew up in, back to the experiences, it's not because the elevators are broken, it's because not enough power is coming into certain communities that we are nearing brownouts. So we need to change the way that we interact with and deal with energy in our community. So we need that type of investment. I think about the bathrooms of the NYCHA developments that grew up in, and they have these little things in the bathrooms like air vents, but they're clogged and they're filled with soot and they're disgusting. And who can breathe in that and still be healthy? Or the mold from, you know, the walls and the water, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you tie all of these things into play, and when you're sitting down at the budget, you look and you say, there's different tables in the budget. Not everything NYCHA has to come from the housing table. We can go to the energy table and get some of these resources addressed on that table, which sometimes is a bigger piece of the pie. Or we can go to the health table and deal with some of these situations, because our housing is interrelated with our healthcare, particularly when we talk about the fact that sometimes our housing is killing us. And so again, our experiences allow us to be creative in the way that we look at, we address the budget, we interact with it. And, you know, we as women, we have to do this all the time, even in our own homes, in terms of balancing our own family budgets. And so we, instead of balancing our budgets on the back of our families and our communities, we utilize all of those intricate experiences to enhance it and try to get a bigger piece of it.
Thank you so very much. Councilwoman, did you want to add anything to that discussion?
She was so comprehensive. I forgot what the question was. I'm so sorry. Latrice, you go, girl.
I'm a little bit of a nerd sometimes, you know,
No,
and
no.
when I get with Joy, we just be like, you know, hey, go your nerd or my nerd.
And we could just add our nerd on top of it.
Well, would you like to say the question
sure.
again,
No problem. We were talking about issues that we often get pigeonholed as you know, what women's issues are. And you know, thinking of a larger, there's still a budget to negotiate, not only on the state level, but we'll have to come to the city. I know you all have started that already on the city level, and sort of thinking beyond what we get pigeonholed into women's issues, and given the constraints that COVID-19 and our economic situation presents to us, what are some of the things that you're looking at that are not perceived as women's issues, but are something that we need to make sure that women have a seat at the table in discussions as the city now begins to negotiate its budget process?
I think one of the overarching issues that is predominant right now is healthcare, access to healthcare, access to PPE, access to vaccine. You know, we represent communities that have historically and systemically been, you know, under-resourced or not resourced at all. We have communities that have been serviced by folks who have no understanding of cultural competency, who don't bring the right attitude to our issues. You know, we have the issues of, you know, morbidity and comorbidities that are exasperated by all of the things that you know, have come to fore, not just COVID, but, you know, the economic disparities, the educational disparities. We're going to have a generation of young people who are not only undereducated, but not educated, you know, and no one's addressing these issues. We have, you know, schools where our young people are not thriving. And so my concern during this budget cycle is getting the folks who have been, I feel, talking out of both sides of their mouth when they say that we're going to right these inequities. We're going to make sure that the historic and systemic disparities that we see in Black and Brown communities are now given resources and are addressed. And then they don't put the money where their mouth is. You know, we have young people who need jobs, and the city constantly cuts funding for jobs. We had young people who have been locked in their homes for over a year, and the city government has the audacity to say that we're not going to do summer programming for Sonic for our middle school young people, the group that's at most risk of all of the negative issues that could befall them. You know, they're out there, they're the target of over policing, they're the target of not having, you know, anything to do. So what are they going to do? That we're not teaching them or preparing them to enter the workforce. And so for me, this budget cycle is really important to try to make sure that communities that have already been negatively impacted, that have doubly been impacted by COVID, are the priority. And so it's really important that we address these inequalities. And and what's happening is there's a lot of talk around things. I'll give you an example. There's a lot of talk about homeless people and finding places for homeless people to live, and communities that are under-resourced and impacted. But yet the city government would put a homeless shelter in the middle of a community that's already under-resourced. There's no resources, and that we're not prepared to serve, to help the people who are in the shelter, because they're not even doing what the community that lives in that neighborhood needs. And so I just think that one of the most important things is the healthcare disparities, and the fact that we're not addressing the needs of our young people at the levels that we need to ensure that they have all the opportunity that they need to succeed.
You know, in the beginning of the conversation, I think each of you made some mention about knowing each other in different, whether it's before elected, or in the case of Assemblymember Walker, worked for the congressional member, or sort of others. And Senator Savino, you also talked about the women coming into the body now are much younger than you were at the time, and wanted to sort of spend some time to talk about how we continue to expand or replicate ourselves, you know, in the spaces that we're in. And you know, I know firsthand, you know, for majority of you, how you are mentoring, how you are ensuring that there are more women who have the knowledge, who have the skills, who are more ready on day one than you had to be. So I want to, you know, just hear from you on what more should we be doing. And I'll start with you, Assemblywoman Walker. What more should we be doing to prepare a future in which I'm not just thinking of balance and parity? You know, can you imagine a future where it's actually, you know, more often than not, women who are the electeds, who are the executives, than there are, you know, men. I can give you a whole bunch of studies across the world. In a future led by women actually is, you know, more productive. But I want to hear from you all in terms of how you think we can make sure that a future is not just us, you know, replicating with one person, but that we're replicating with many.
Wow. So first of all, I think my issue is that I was born in 1979. And so I feel like I'm on the cusp of being like Gen X and a millennial. And so I fight with the millennials to be like, I'm still young too, you know, and then I also have to
we
like
are
look
not,
up
no,
to the Gen X folks.
We not.
And and I'll be like, look, I remember those songs too, right? And so, but the beauty of it is that I'm young enough, but I'm still old enough. And I'm still old enough to have been connected to what's tried and what's true and the things that make sense. And respect for the institution, but I'm still like young enough to kind of get out there and also be ready to butt the system. And I also have the benefit of having some really amazing women having poured into me. Of course, the Honorable Tish James, who is our Attorney General, you know, she was my campaign manager when I ran for district leader in a race in Brownsville, and now she's the AG. Like, you know, and it was like learning her strategy and how she handled me in that sense was the best learning tool, I think, in campaign politics that I ever could have gotten, even though I was like thrown in the middle of it. And then, of course, watching the Congresswoman work and always exhibiting grace under fire really just, you know, helps me to figure out that, you know, I don't have to go in a room and turn over every table. But sometimes I can sit at that table nicely and, you know, and be all in my zhuzh. And so, and then based on the fact that they've poured into me, it makes me realize that I get to pour into other sisters too. And of course, my grow up sister, Councilwoman Alika Ampry Samuel, who will be the next speaker of the New York City Council, if I could have anything to do with it, of course, was my chief of staff. And now she's a council member, maybe going on to do some greater things. Up here, there's a sister named Nikita, who I met, you know, outside working on a campaign. She was an intern with me in the office of the Congresswoman. Then I hired her when I got elected. And now she got a job in the second floor. And now she's running a local diversity initiative of herself. We know that Isis is a whole human superstar, and who knows like what her next lifestyle or lifetime is going to look like. But there's a whole host of other women who are just like that. There's a young sister in Asia. She was my intern from Albany University, and now I hired her, and hopefully, you know, her future is bright. And so I'll say that we have to hire one another. And one of the things that I know former First Lady, forever First Lady, Michelle Obama says that men fail up. And we have to do the same thing to our sisters as well. Right. And so that's just, you know, I guess for me, like I had some huge stepping stones. And so I want to be able to pay it forward and give it back to, you know, all of the other women who are coming up behind me.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that, you know, we provide role models. What didn't happen for me when I made the decision to run was that there were no role models. There was no one, no woman that I could, of color that I could come to and talk to about the experience of running as the first, you know, person of color. And so I think role models are really important. And what we've done on Staten Island is we started a political club where we're actually teaching people what politics is. What is politics 101?
Debbie, you muted yourself.
Oh, you muted.
So thank you.
problem.
You know, we're teaching the community what politics is. What's politics 101? Because so you can't be empowered if you don't know what you're trying to be empowered about. And so we're spending time actually teaching people the rudiments of government. You know, and I know Diane can vouch for this, that people sometimes don't even understand the differences between city government, state government, and federal government. You know, we get calls to do things that I know my sister Yvette Clark would be able to do, you know, in Washington. God bless you, because I never ever want to go there. You know, and you know, are things that on the state level, you know, should be handled. So it's very important that we have first role models. It's very important that we see people who look like us, but then it's about educating people about what actually it is. And and so we're doing that. And the Women's Caucus in the City Council, you know, we made a vow that we were going to work really hard to increase the number of women that were in City Council. And each of us then decided that we were going to mentor and sort of help bring a person along so that they could be competitive, and, you know, and hopefully we would increase our number, because we were down to 9 women in the City Council from 17. And so it looks like we're gonna, you know, we're really gonna accomplish our goal. You know, the goal was started by Melissa Mark Viverito to have 21 in 2021. And so we're working really hard to mentor young women and some old women, you know, what it's about and what it takes to get there.
See, and I didn't start out looking to get into politics. It was never something I really ever thought I would do. I was, I kind of found myself involved in the labor movement the old-fashioned way with a layoff notice in my hand, and I got involved in the union. But I got, it kind of inspired me to become a union activist. And I was incredibly lucky that I got involved in, a union that had a long storied history in the city of New York. And I was mentored by some incredibly, amazing people. Some of you knew my former president, you knew Yvette, you knew him, Debbie, you knew Charles Ensley. He was an amazing man, probably the closest thing to a second father that I ever had. But he introduced me to some of the most amazing people ever, people who were icons in the civil rights movement, because that's who he grew up with. And I got, mentored by people who knew not just, who grew up in the civil rights movement, but people who grew up in the city's labor movement. And I learned from them, and they kind of made me who I am. But at the same time, our union was also built by people who, were historic in the city's political movement. Mary Pinkett, she was the vice president of our union. She was the first woman vice president of a city union. And I remember she terrified me. I used to have to go meet with her when she was still a councilwoman. And she was so prim and so proper. Those of you knew Mary, she was just like that. And if I went to see her, like, she would look me up and down, to make sure I was properly dressed. And I would be like, oh God, I have to meet with Mary. What am I going to do? And I remember she was so important to us because she had a place in our history. She was there in the 1969 strike. She got arrested, and, it was just, we had a big, plaque to her. I know Michelle is on here somewhere and she knows all about Mary's history. And I remember she once said to me, because we would say, you were the first this, and you were the first that, and you were the first woman, and you were the first African-American woman to get elected. And she said, my dear, it is not important to be the first. It is more important that you're not the last. And that, and that sticks with me to this day. And so whenever I think of young women who I've, inspired to work with me or to come along with me, it's not just about you get an opportunity to hang with me. It's like, how am I going to inspire you the same way that these people inspired me? What chance can I give you? How can I make you feel the same way these folks made me feel, to give me that chance, so that the day came when David Patterson called me on the phone and said, I want to have lunch with you. And he pitched the idea of running for Senate. My first reaction was, me? What? That I then said I could do it. How can I inspire a young woman to think when that moment comes that she can do the same thing that I could? Because it never occurred to me up until that day that I could ever run for Senate and take my place there. And if it hadn't been for all of those people up until that moment, it never would have happened. So how can I be that kind of person? And that's what I think I have to be responsible for.
And I think and I want to just pick up on something that Diane spoke about when she quoted Mary Pinkett. It's not important to be the first, but it's critical that we're not the last. And I think that what we're witnessing now is that our presence has made a difference. And that young women of all ages are more interested than ever in offering themselves in public service. I mean, the numbers have been exponential in growth compared to a time when, say, my mother ran for office, right? Our mere presence, our getting that breakthrough is an inspiration. What I do is I create the space for there to be interaction, for there to be discussion, for there to be questions about how to do it. I was the beneficiary of mentoring from a number of elected officials. Yeah, I had everyone talks about my mom, and yes, that was in the House, but I was a staffer to State Senator Velma Montgomery. I was a staffer to Assemblywoman Barbara Clark. I was a staffer to former Assemblywoman Barbara Patton. So there were women that I sought out and that did not see it as robbery to have me in their office, to show me how to help fuel my passion for public service. And that's what I continue to do, because I'm passionate about serving folks. And I believe in succession leadership. to be quite honest with you. You know, I think that it's important that I'm not the last. You know, I'm fortunate in that I succeeded my mother in the New York City Council, which was unheard of. A woman succeed in the same family. We're the first. We're the only. And what we need to be is an inspiration so that other women, that Nile will see in Latrice, should she so desire and have the passion for service, the ability to say, there's nothing that stands in my way other than my own inhibitions, right? So I believe that we are in a great moment. It's not quite the tipping point. We're not at 50-50, but I see more and more women just like going for it, which I think is fabulous. And many of them, you know, they're coming from all walks of life. And that's what representative government is truly about. Is reflective of different lived experiences, and those experiences will inform how we go in and make those changes. You know, it's very interesting. The Republicans in the House of Representatives has more women in this session than they've ever had before. And it's a spectrum of women. There are 2 Asian women that were elected. And when all of the anti-Asian sentiment began to bubble up, you know, they had to look their own party in the face and say, you know, perhaps if Donald Trump didn't say the things he said, didn't do the things he did, that we would not have seen such a spike in anti-Asian hatred that many believe created the climate in which 6 Asian women were killed in a massage businesses in Atlanta. Those women, their voices on the Republican side of the aisle is important, it's critical. But were they not elected, you know, we would be, you know, just, it would be the same dichotomy that we're always accustomed to with Democrats versus Republicans. Now we're talking about right versus wrong, right? And it comes from a bipartisan perspective. And that, so the more women that we can inspire, that we can open room for, that we can engage with, you know, the more opportunities will present themselves. You know, Diane, you talked about, you know, the fact that you were called and asked by David Paterson, right? Imagine the women that get calls from Andrea Stewart Cousins. Imagine, you know, imagine the women that get called by Nancy Pelosi now. You know, the dynamics have begun to take on a life of its own, and we all play a role in that.
Well, ladies, thank you so very much for this important conversation. I'm going to bring our hosts back on as they do their closing remarks, but this has been really powerful conversation and an opportunity to hear directly from you on not only how you are leading in your respective legislative bodies, but then also how you are ensuring that the issues that you were sent there and the people that you were sent there to represent are heard, are advanced, but then also how you're making sure to groom and mentor more women to come into this space and to take our rightful place in leadership. So thank you to our organizers. Thank you to Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, Senator Diane Savino, Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, and Councilwoman Debbie Rose for making time for us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I just want to say I picked up a few words: accidental activists, Black dolls in legislature, voices not previously heard are now shaping policy, economic development with childcare, endurance, game changers, and let's not be the last. In closing, Staten Island Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated would like to thank our fantastic legislators. Thank you so much. Latrice, thank you so much, Assemblymember Walker, for just being there and on drop of a dime, I picked up the phone and called you and 4 hours ago, and you said yes. So thank you so much. And thank you for the past, the present, and the future work in our communities. And thanks again to everyone. And our awesome moderator, L. Joy Williams, I love you. Thank you so much. You're the best. You're the best. I just want to say, you know, everyone, we're going to have different activities going on. We ask you that you go to www.dstSIalumni.org to see our upcoming programs and events. And be well, be safe, and wear your mask. Good night. Thank you all. Love you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.